Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to Let's Build Daily. I'm your host, Chris Carolan. Super special guest this week, David Askvig. How you doing, man?
Doing well. Excited to be here.
Excited to have you. You just put out a great informative post, I thought, last week about how to process map in relationship to leads and deals and contacts and companies, and including some post-sale goodness, which I also always appreciate over here. But before we dive in, can you just give us a quick intro?
Yeah. Awesome to be here. Thank you for having me. So, my name's David Askvig, and I have been a lover of all things HubSpot since 2017. Before that, so my background is in marketing. That's kind of where I started. I was using Pardot back in the early days, got acquired by ExactTarget and then Salesforce. And, it's kind of sad. It could have been good, but it's gone downhill. And then, really jumped into kind of sales ops a little bit because, sales and marketing really have to align. And so, spent my time as a Salesforce admin for a company and kind of all that entails, which was a lot of fun. And then, I've done some fairly big migrations. I'm a big proponent of all-in-one HubSpot instances, and that's actually my preferred way to work is, companies that are using it for both sales and marketing, as well as like Service Hub post sales. I think a lot of companies can really, instead of using multiple tools, they can actually use HubSpot to do a lot of post sales stuff. Have a passion for that. And then, last year I decided to kind of go out on my own and help other companies use HubSpot and kind of optimize their businesses and processes. It's kind of a scary step, but I wanted to grow, and, you grow by doing scary things and hard things. And it's been a fun ride. I've had a lot of companies that have trusted me to help them, and it's been a lot of fun. Most of them, are still with me, and so that's been fun. And so that kind of brings me to today. I think I try to stay active on LinkedIn, but talked a little bit the other week about just my process for mapping. And I think basically anytime I start with any customer or client, I map things out. Sometimes it's just for me. And sometimes it's something to share with them so they can kind of start to visualize their process, and we can, brainstorm together. Sometimes, like right on the call, and we might do some of this today, it's, like, tell me about your process. Then I'm actually building it in front of them, and then they're able to visualize it. And then they're like, actually, it's not like this. It's a little bit like this. And then like, oh, we could actually do this. And it's this like a springboard of creativity. So, yeah.
Yeah. And it's so informative when you can cause those like, oh, no, it's not like that. It's like this, because it just tells you so much about, where their head is in like how they think about stuff versus what reality is versus like the challenges of documenting it. Because I know, you mentioned we grow by doing, scary and hard things. Process mapping scares the hell out of some people. And, it's always that thing that's on the list, but never gets done. Very hard to maintain. And, we were talking before the show, we were both in the RevOps boot camp this year. And personally, I've shared that it's been like this mapping skill, let's say, was definitely something I was missing when I was a marketing leader, and trying to create a common language that everybody could speak from, both from hey, this is what we're trying to do, but also this is the structure that we have in place now, and this is why it's not going to support the things we've said we want to do. But here are some ways that, we can support it. And in using this mapping, I've found, just being able to not have to explain everything in every conversation that you have goes a long way. because we're talking about some complex stuff here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the way you broke it down, I thought was, very straightforward. And I'd love, as we start talking about this, if you could bring up, what you shared last
Yeah,
week,
sure.
and you already have shared some wins as far as introducing it and going live with these processes in the organization. So if you could just take us through this process real quick.
Yeah, sure. A little context. So every company prioritize things based on like where they have the most pain, right, or where they want to see the most success. With this in particular, they wanted kind of a bigger focus on post sale, and so you'll see that's a little bit maybe more built out here, visualized. Um, so they were essentially using one sales pipeline to kind of represent the whole, like everything. And so, and that included kind of post sale. So like a deal would be one, and then there would be other stages, like kind of more post sales. And, there's no one way to do anything, like, and I'll be the first to admit that. So, that's by no means not a way to do it. It could be a great way to do it. It just kind of depends. Like you kind of have to figure out what works best for this team. One of the things I saw early on is they had quite a few steps. And when you have a whole bunch of steps, like perhaps one pipeline for all those doesn't make sense. Also, they had different streams of like ownership. So like, oh, this owner should kind of own these things, and this owner should own those things, and sharing that with one like kind of linear pipeline with those stages kind of was confusing, and like who owns it at what point. And so um, as we were kind of talking and so forth, it kind of became clear that perhaps we should kind of break this up a little bit. So that's, I guess, a little bit of context. Um,
So, like, if we
yeah, go
could
ahead.
just dig into that a little bit. So they're looking for help with post sales. Um, how are they, like, are they explaining the pains that they're having with having everything in one, deal pipeline, or are you kind of, inferring pains that they likely have because they're doing it that way? Like, can they actually feel the pain from doing it that way?
Yeah, I mean, so just thinking about some of our early conversations, like it was first presented to me as like, hey, our deal stages are just kind of crazy. They're all over the place. And in my head, I was first thinking it was like, oh, their actual process to sell, is not clear. But as we kind of discussed, it was like, oh, what you actually mean is once you've won a deal, then it's kind of crazy. And so, um, you know, yeah, it's kind of that's kind of how I heard it. And then as I kind of looked closer, it was like, oh, it's really post sale. It seems like where the you're having the issue. And there, I mean, what is a sale? Like you have to define that. Like what's post sale? Like what's one? Like it's kind of, you want to define those. But if you're thinking by the time you ship it out to the customer and they've been trained to use said product, if that's one, then that's not post sales. But typically, there's some sort of like contract, right? That's kind of one, and then post sales after that. So
So it sounds like they were looking for some order to the chaos. Um, did they share like why they wanted that order? Like, was like more visibility or mistakes being made, or anything like
yeah.
that?
So the my main stakeholder is kind of like so he's actually a founder, but he's also does a lot on the operations front. He's kind of working to hand some of it off. So he's wanting to be able to have something he can hand off that's clear. He's kind of the connective tissue right now to all these things, but in a
Yes.
in a better, more, I guess, well designed, integrated, automated system, then he can hand stuff off to other people and focus in areas of higher impact. So I think part of that is just kind of planning ahead, like, hey, I kind of know how it works, but I can't explain it to others. It can fall apart easily and I have to fix it. So I think that was definitely a pain. And he had said, I just haven't had time to focus on this. And
Right.
that's very real as well.
Okay. Yeah, we see a lot of that where HubSpot, to its credit, makes it easy to do a lot of things, and the functionality, once you understand, like for example, that deal stages, very similar to any kind of milestone, stage and gate kind of process. Like all of a sudden, like any kind of project, work, and things you want to track can be applied to that object. But the second you try to onboard or delegate or bring anybody else into that, it's very hard. Like it sounds like he was figuring out to provide clarity needed to actually get the help, that you need. So that definitely resonates.
Yeah.
So as he said that, where do you start when you? It sounds like you highlighted immediately that we just had a ton of stages.
Yeah.
Where else did you go?
So I like to you'll notice I don't have the company here. I mean, that's obviously an object. I kind of try to focus on what do I actually need to show. Um, and so where I went is actually before we met, I kind of designed some of this. Like in general, you'll have a contact and you'll have a deal and stages, and I plotted those out. And this is before we had any sort of idea of any ticket. Um, and so, some things everyone, if you've used HubSpot, you're familiar with these things. So you have like, for example, life cycle stages. Uh, and I think life cycle stages, there's a whole bunch of like ways people use them, but in general, I love them because they provide a reason to talk about the funnel. Like regardless of how you implement it, it's just a great conversation of like, how do you see your funnel, right? And what are those moments? And who cares what terminology you use? Don't really care. But what are those moments of that journey are just really helpful to have that conversation. And so, these are, nothing crazy. So, lead, qualified lead. Again, we didn't spend a whole bunch of time on like kind of the pre-sales and so forth. Um, but was thinking through, okay, like at what point do you have a real opportunity here? Like when do you consider it in pipeline, for example? And, you can see,
Can you zoom in
yeah,
a little
yeah,
bit
for
for
sure.
us?
Um,
Cool.
so you can see here are my deal stages, and then this is the life cycle stage opportunity here. There were, I don't even remember, 15 deal stages probably before. And actually, since then, we've actually edited these slightly. But so he said, well, when we send a quote, there's a lot of conversations that happen early on that may go nowhere. Really, when like we send a quote, that's where we really kind of track it as like an opportunity in pipeline. And um, my preference is to use deals fairly early in the process uh, because it allows you to better track. I've heard it coined inquiry based like opportunity management or deal management, where as soon as you have someone either raise their hand or an outreach or something interesting, if you create a deal, you're able to better track the full funnel of like, oh, how many appointments did we schedule that actually never happened? How many appointments actually turned into a true opportunity where we sent a quote? Like if you're not creating a deal earlier, it's a little bit harder to like see that in a funnel. So I prefer to create deals early on, um, and then have one stage where it's like this is now in pipeline. So it could be called sales qualified opportunity, or in this case, at deal stage 3, that's when the life cycle stage is opportunity. And what you want to do there is you want to like make sure you date that so that you can have like the date that when that started. And like let's say you're doing reporting, you can do deal reporting on the entire funnel. Or you can just say, show me all mine that are actually sales qualified opportunities. And you'd only be looking at, stage 3 forward. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think this is where you know every organization is going to be different as far as the process goes, but the buying process isn't different in terms of you're going to be responding to some kind of signal, let's say. And if you really want to understand whether your investment in marketing or maybe BDRs or SDRs is working kind of to speed up the sales process or support the sales process. So many people are worried about attribution. If you don't open up the deal until like you're halfway through the conversation and the sales team has already done a bunch of work, and you're missing out on all of the effort that has been put in so far and understanding exactly what that's doing. So I love the approach of um, starting to track that. Some people are starting to use
Mm-hmm.
leads, to help with that. I've heard a lot of, deal stage zero
Yeah.
type
Yeah.
setups, but the key is really, I think, to, I think it can be simplified in most organizations to say, like, if your team has decided to do outreach or put in some kind of work to like move this person forward or qualify them or something, you've got to find a way to track that effectively in the system so that you can say, hey, all this email outreach we're doing isn't working, but this LinkedIn outreach we're doing is working really well. So maybe we should figure more of that out. Right.
Totally.
So did he have the first two stages here in the deal when you,
Um, who? I'm trying to remember the very first ones. I don't think they were doing it this early. I think it
okay.
was just once they had held a meeting, and I said, hey,
Right.
maybe we should do it earlier. They were actually using like HubSpot meeting links, which you can kind of automate the creation of a deal too, which is nice. Uh,
Yeah.
Now, not every deal necessarily follows that path. So sometimes you have to have, your reps actually create that or something like that. One other point I wanted to make on this creating deals earlier is I think it also creates an object that you don't forget about. So like
Yeah.
if let's say you didn't create deals between opportunity scheduled and meeting held, right? Well, it's very easy to forget about the opportunities that scheduled that never turned into anything, right? Like they out of sight, out of mind. But because you purposely create it, you have people asking, hey, what happened with that? And then, oh, how many of those actually went nowhere? Like it kind of is a forcing function to not forget about that, to make sure there's pressure to actually push those forward. So I think that's also a very real reason.
Yeah. No, I think bringing visibility on the things that need to be managed every
Yeah.
day is huge. And that's, um, I know you touched on it and you'll probably touch on it when we get to the post sale stuff, but that's one of the biggest wins you can get to when you create these different spaces in HubSpot for any, like all these different teams to be able to work together, but also have their own like owned piece of, data container, if you will. Right.
Yep. For sure. Yeah. So then, and I would encourage people to do this like with whoever the stakeholder you're working with. If you have a team, whoever it is, like actually build it in front of them. So like once let's say you have these deal stages, you can say, okay, what information do we want at these stages, like in general? Now this probably isn't all of the ones we built, but some of them. But like for example, in this case, they wanted to know. So the meeting wasn't necessarily the demo, but they wanted to know if actually do we need to hold a demo based on that conversation, right? And then if yes, we have a drop down of like which demo type. They have different products they would demo, and so we can then along the way make sure we're deciding which fields we're asking, and it provides a template for the reps to follow of like, oh, I need to make sure this is information is there, and so yeah, that can be created. um,
And I like the clarity of these stage names,
yeah,
um, which can often be challenging. But I think if we can achieve the goal of, at the high level, we're looking at our set of deals and we're trying to use the deal board, we need to be able to look. And if it's labeled in a certain way, we know certain things have happened, like for sure. Right.
yeah. So I mean, here's an example, and I'm really big on this. Let's say I were to name this quote, right? uh
Yeah.
am I building the quote? Did I send the quote? Am I thinking about a quote? Like, I don't know. Like, just like be so clear. And I like to use past tense because it's like that happened. It's a very simple thing you can do. So I would very highly recommend having clarity there. So yeah, thanks for pointing that
Yeah.
out.
I think the key is making sure you pick one. I've seen some either present tense or I need to do this thing worked, or even this is happening. Um, like negotiation is often a stage which I think can work in the right circumstances. The key is kind of, you've got to pick one so that kind of all the stages are aligned in what they're trying to
Yeah.
communicate, with the status,
And these
right?
fields also help you. For example, like, um, if you move it in here, it says date quote sent, like, and it's a required field. Well, you have to have sent the quote in order to put it in the stage. So that also kind of helps lead you down the path.
Yep.
Um, let's see. I'll just mention real quick. So for this particular company, they said that sometimes, so they work kind of in education and funding. You have to kind of wait for the right timing of funding. So you could have a conversation and funding comes in a while. So there's a lot of dead space here. And so we essentially created, like workflows, and after it's been so long in this stage, as like a reminder for the reps to like update the close date, check in with the customer, that type of thing. And you'll notice, I don't know if you see this, but if I hover this, it says click to view external link. As like a RevOps geek, I love to put links to the exact workflow, because now if I like, they said they want this to be 2 months, instead of like going into HubSpot and like, what did I name it? Where is it? I just basically click, go to the workflow, update it. So it creates a very simple way for you to manage it moving forward. So one part's visualization. The other part's like documenting, so you can move and build faster.
Yeah.
Um,
And I love these, I love these tasks just because, like, I don't know if you've ever talked to like diehard SaaS pipeline managers, but the idea of like a 3-month-old deal
that is kind of
is
crazy.
like heresy to some of
This
them.
goes all the way to
But
9.
that's where
Yeah.
you get into these spaces where, hey, the funding happens when it happens. And if you know that information, like, you do yourself a disservice and actually cause damage when, like, to opportunities, if you think you can try to close it
Yeah.
faster, or if there's, they're gonna, especially with government and education, like, end of Q3, beginning of the year, like, that's when it's closing, right? Now there should be no reason to have to wait to open up the deal, right? Like a couple months before, right? Because that's when you lose track. You don't remember when it's a couple months before, and you might have a perfectly great opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
sitting there. So
Yeah. Timing.
there's lots of weight. Like, I mean, the beauty of HubSpot is I think you can manage it. Even if you have some that are fast and some that are slow, you can set up different pipelines. But even what you've done here, instead of trying to force everything around meeting cadence or, stages, there's multiple ways we can try to support, these longer sales cycles, more effectively. Because if we can do that, there's lots of insights to be gained. Um, maybe you do track it for a whole year, and for half the year, everybody that reaches out is tire kickers because they really don't have any skin in the game until it's budget time, right? You can learn that, by setting up processes like this.
Totally. Yeah. Like you actually it's okay to have a whole bunch in some of these, like if we're waiting for the right exact moment, because when the moment's right, we're ready. So,
Yeah.
all right. So do you
And
want to jump into kind of post sales?
yeah, let's dig into that. It sounded like that was the big
Yeah, so
change.
before the stages were like there was some sort of like PO received, and then it was like kind of went into like stages like that would happen after the sale essentially. And so um in talking with him, we were like, I think this should be managed with like a ticket. Like, or I mean, you could do a separate deal pipeline. Like, for example, let's say you don't have Service Hub, you could potentially use another sales pipeline to manage onboarding. There's kind of tricks you can use, but uh, in this case, they had Service Hub, and so we did the create a ticket. In this case, assigned to an onboarding specialist. And when we were first talking, so you'll notice I actually have 2 ticket pipelines. We actually weren't thinking about 2 ticket pipelines at all. It was just like talking about onboarding. So, for example, and I like to like kind of define things. So tickets are placed here when a deal is closed. One, and this pipeline helps to track the onboarding tasks and status for the new customer. So I like to kind of put definitions there. And so in their sale, they have to have the customer fill out some documents that get sent to them. They do a kickoff, they do training and setup with said product, and so there's a lot of like customer facing tasks that need to happen to help this customer, successfully use their product. And so we were kind of just plotting out those steps. And what I saw and what we kind of realized is there was also steps. So this customer, this company, they, when the customer, says, yes, I want to move forward, they actually have to order from a different vendor these products. And that's kind of on the back end. Like that doesn't interact with their customer. That's just something they need to do. But then they have their customer facing like flow. And it became really odd to have the customer fill out documents. Oh, by the way, place the order with the vendor. And then, schedule a kickoff call with the customer. Oh, acknowledge when the vendor is actually going to ship the product. It didn't fit. And also they had different ownership of like the person owning onboarding was different than the person like that's going to place the order and make sure that happened and so forth. And so it was kind of like an aha moment, like, oh, actually, these are kind of two separate work streams. Let's treat them as such. And so then we just decided to create a fulfillment pipeline. So certificates are placed here when a new onboarding ticket is created. So the way I did it is when an onboarding pipeline ticket's created, then I create off of that ticket the new ticket. And I did that because I wanted them associated, because I actually share information between them. And then the purpose of this is to track internal ordering of the product for the customer.
This is great. Yeah, I think this is a great example of what a lot of people are running into, like as they experience the world outside of deals. And this is a part of the challenge as we move to customer platform is like, how do we serve these other stakeholders that are also involved in customer processes? But maybe they've been trying to do this out of accounting systems or spreadsheets or just stuff that doesn't support communicating with the customer. Mm-hmm. And this second fulfillment, pipeline is a perfect example of, we're not doing a whole lot here. We're just creating a place to understand this part of the process and understand it in a way that it can be managed by somebody else. Somebody else owns this piece. In bigger organizations, they're probably working in another system, and that's okay. Like if there's a purchasing team, for example, that has to, all the POs have to run through them. They've got to generate it. But now there's a place to bring it into HubSpot. So now it can help manage the onboarding flow, right? And everything aligns instead of all these emails back and forth between our teams, and even the sales guys who stay engaged after the sale and they have an account management role. Mm-hmm. Now they can see everything that goes on, because a lot of times you'll have the issue where as much as we want to hand it off, and just say, hey, you take care of the customer, the sales guys do such a good job of building relationships that if there's a problem, they're going to reach out to the sales guy. Yep. And if the sales guy has no visibility, right?
Yeah, where is it at? Where are things at? Yep, yeah. They can answer it right away.
Right. I've heard so many times like, oh, let me call my production manager so that they can look into their software and then get back to me. And then you're bothering the production manager who doesn't know, So this just goes such a long way. And you mentioned, can you share just the value of having this map when you're trying to, optimize HubSpot for this customer?
Yeah. I mean, I think us mapping it out and seeing kind of how kind of these two streams were trying to be forced into one, like we were kind of able to visualize it. And as soon as we said, well, let's just experiment with what if they were two different work streams, it just clarity. And it was like, that actually makes more sense. And so,
yeah, I can call this stuff what I want to call it now, because it's not a deal.
Yeah. So it just right. Kind of help with the clarity for sure. And it's helpful to like walk through whoever your stakeholder is. Like, for example, here's, again, you can see these are kind of like either, tasks or workflows, but he said, hey, it would be really good to know like have a 3 day notice before the ship date, because sometimes the ship date's pushed out. So I want to be able to have a reminder to then go ask my vendor, hey, are we still good on, ship date? And so that was an example of, now that you see this laid out, is like, hey, at this stage, can we do this? Great, let's do it. Let's add it in.
Yes.
Um,
Oh, we all long for that
yeah.
moment where we know they're invested, they're understanding, they're starting to understand how the system works.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we take very much for granted, what we know about what this stuff can do, what we deem as easy, or like, of course, common sense, it can do that. A lot of people, they just don't, right? They're not in it every day like we are.
Sure.
So they don't know how easy it is to schedule a task based on all this stuff. They don't know everything that just setting up these stages activates in the rest of
Mm-hmm.
HubSpot, right? And when you can put it in a document like this, and they're feeling it in the document, they're feeling it in HubSpot, it helps them put the dots together. Because now when you're not there, they have something to reference
Yes.
to confirm, like, oh, what did we go
Mm-hmm.
over? And that's so huge, because so much happens verbally when you don't have stuff like this. It just creates the space for misinformation and misunderstanding,
Yeah.
and then we got to start there every time explaining. Right now we can just keep building, on this, and it's really um it's exciting to see, man. It sounds like it's going well.
Yeah. Yeah. We essentially launched it. Well, this week actually is when we decided to have. So we kept them in an old sales pipeline, which didn't like transition to these tickets, but have asked everyone to move their deals over, and in some cases moved them in mass over to the new pipeline. Which, when it becomes close one, that's when the whole post sales stuff, starts. So, yeah, and like,
And did you do
I,
some training with the team
um,
as you're introducing this?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. Mostly with the main stakeholder who's kind of going to take it to the team. But on the post sale side, there's a limited amount of people, so like we didn't radically change the sales process up front. We just took out a whole bunch of stages post sales and moved them
Right.
somewhere else, right? And so,
Yep.
um, yeah. Um, Other just kind of unique things I'll mention, just maybe if this gives people ideas, but they had a, like, they called it like an onboarding specialist who needed to like have these documents set out and do some of that for the customer. Now that could be the original deal person, the deal owner, or let's just kind of have a lower value resource maybe do that part. And so what we have is the ticket is owned by this specialist for the first 3 stages. And then as soon as they need to do a kickoff call, they actually then invite the original sales rep back in, to then kind of, because they have the relationship and they'll kind of move it forward from there. And so then we actually just changed ownership of the ticket back to the original deal owner. So, there's kind of unique nuances like that is kind of fun to build based on how they want to work the deal. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
That goes such a long way. And just, we talk a lot about breaking down silos, which I'm 100% behind. Um, but when you start working with individual stakeholders, uh, and they have a specific job to do each day, they need to know that they have like a space to work in that is theirs. They don't have to worry about other people like changing stuff. And it's not necessarily a wall, because we want, other people to be able to see that stuff sometimes, but you have to be able to create clarity. It often sounds a lot like silos when you have all these different roles, right? But I have found that, the more you're having everybody work out of the same exact space and who owns what when, like, it's just right for, data maintenance nightmares, and people stop using the system. And it's just hard for people to understand what you want them to do
Mm-hmm.
sometimes if you don't provide, this level of clarity like this. And I hadn't seen, this approach before, but I like it in terms of just process clarity about who owns what when. It goes such a long way. And that's usually the challenges we see when people have not, made their way out of deals,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you've got everybody working, like, who's responsible for changing stages, and you've got some stages as tasks, some stages as like milestones, and it's just, of course, that's not gonna, work out well for you. So really love what you've done here to really break it out. And
On the one thing
uh,
I want to mention on tickets versus tasks, um,
yeah,
I prefer. So when we first built this, we actually said, okay, at ticket stage one, let's create a task because now they need to send onboarding, and then when we have a ticket in the place order status, let's create a task to place order. And then we're like, why are we tasking ourselves to death? Like, you have a ticket,
yep,
it says where it's at. If those people that are responsible for the tickets are, it's a part of their daily, you know, what's in my ticket? What do I need to move forward? Like, it it removes noise of tasks that task, and it actually provides them just to see at a continuum, like what's where and when does it need to move. Now you could use tasks, like let's say something is in place order for 5 days, maybe then we create a task to remind them, like there's things you can do like that. But I prefer using the tickets sometimes more than tasks. If you do use tasks, though,
yeah,
I would highly recommend using a task queue. I don't know how many people use those. I love them because you can have the task be owned by someone, but it's in a queue. So let's say that person's out of the office. You can have someone else jump in and look at the queue, and it's just very clear what they do. So I would very highly recommend using queues.
yeah. No, I agree, and I think it provides. I know some people appreciate the kind of audit log that it creates for whether the stuff got done or not.
Yeah.
Um, but that's also like, you can recreate that with object stages sometimes, and I think the key is making sure that the task does just serve as a either notification or and it doesn't go like, okay, I need to put all this data inside this task to make sure it gets done. And like, you show up, you have a bunch of comments and notes related to this task, and like, you can't report on any of that. And often it's like a gold mine of how to build out, the object or the stages that you need done, because all the information is. I've seen that with like shipping and, um, you know, kind of address information and stuff like that. So this is really cool, man. A lot of people fighting the good fight right now, trying, to help on the post sale side, but just bringing other teams into HubSpot to make it easier to, you know, create those customer experiences that, we say we want to create. So it's a really, really well done here, man.
One other, well, I'm thinking about, so this is obviously not every system works for every application. So there's always other things, but I guess another idea I'll throw out there that I've used. So in this case, we're using tickets for onboarding and we're using ticket for fulfillment and that type of thing. I have also done where you actually create a custom object to represent the customer account, and then have that custom object have two pipelines. So like, let's say you close a deal, it's a new business. You then create a custom object to represent that account. And it's maybe one-to-one mapped with, like, if you have a product that has like a unique account ID, you keep it like one-to-one mapped with this custom object. And then that object is in the onboarding pipeline, because you can do pipelines on custom objects. And then they go through whatever stages they need to for the onboarding. And then when they're ready to launch, then they go to like the customer pipeline. And now you have this custom object, which represents a one-to-one integration. If you can have it integrate with your product of that account, that's now you can have account management. You can like pipe in data from, like product activity. Like if it's more of a SaaS product, like when did they last log in at the account? How many users are on account? What's their ARR? Like whatever you want to pipe into it. And that can be also a really cool way to, as far as like a kind of post sales onboarding flow. So lots of
Yeah.
fun. I mean, you can build so many different cool ways of doing things depending upon the need.
Yeah, no, and I think the key is like, because I love the concept of creating, a custom object. We've been doing stuff, you know, I've been calling it the deliverable. It's this thing. Just think about what you have to manage, right, to support the customer in their journey. If there is, you know, like even like if there's warranty information, if just these things, whether it could be a physical good that needs to be installed out in the field, and you need to understand when the last service visit was, and that's where there's stuff that has to be managed after. Understanding that tickets and deals and line items are not built for that. So just giving yourself permission to create another object is literally like half the battle. And once you open that up, you're like, oh, wow, I can associate it with everything I need now. I can report on it effectively. Even in the customer success workspace now, you can choose custom objects to support that, using that
Mm-hmm.
workspace. I love where that's going. So really just kind of, that's where we've seen a lot of value in just helping people understand like, deals serve this purpose. Tickets, they're built out to support a very help desk, like situation, which is like, more reactive usually. So uh, that's where even like, so understanding the nuances between the deal functionality based on what it was built for, right? Where we have deal stages, and then we have pipelines for tickets, but that field's going to be called ticket
Mm-hmm.
status, right? Instead of stages. And then we have custom pipelines, right? So there's just all this nuance, and kind of once you get to the custom object level, a lot opens up for you. And yeah, we're a big proponent of that. So I love hearing use cases there. Uh, this has been awesome, man. I appreciate you, sharing this success here. Love getting people into, just doing things in a better way inside of HubSpot, helping their team um, run it. We're seeing a lot of challenges like this, and there is a way to solve for these challenges. So
Yeah.
good to see what you're up to over there.
And you can adapt. So like if I've learned one thing, it's always business is always changing and their needs are always changing, and mapping also helps you pivot very quickly. Like for example, if they said, actually, we do this other process, we need this other pipeline for whatever reason, boom, let's do it. It allows you to like kind of pivot really, really quickly as well.
Yeah, yeah, and even just creating the plan on what the pivot's going to look like,
Mm-hmm.
right, is huge. Like turning this off, turning this on, it becomes very like that visual. Those visual cues just do so much in terms of making it more
Mm-hmm.
tangible when you're talking about this digital space that no one can see,
Mm-hmm.
right? So really powerful stuff. And I'd love to have you back on at some point. There's so many mapping
Yeah.
conversations we could
Yeah,
have,
for sure.
right? As HubSpot continues to expand into all these different use cases. So really appreciate you coming on today. Um, and I'll invite the audience, as you're looking at your maps, as you're thinking about your maps, as you're thinking about your messy HubSpot and what you could possibly do to start to improve it. Find the opportunity and let's grow. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, David.